And just like that, a war dog no one could touch lay his head in the lap of a girl the world had forgotten. Welcome to Hero Paws 77, where we don't just tell stories about dogs. We share stories about healing, hope, and the quiet power of being seen. In this emotional, true-to-heart narrative, you'll follow a silent child, a grieving old man, and a dog once trained to fight, all walking different paths, until stillness brings them together. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stay, said a voice from an old world. And this story proves it. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's a life lesson wrapped in fur, silence, and sunlight. So stay. Watch to the very end. And if this story touches something in you, leave a comment, subscribe to help us reach 10,000 hearts, and help this channel keep telling stories that matter. The late winter wind drifted down the ridge like it was looking for a place to rest, but couldn't find one. It passed over the weathered fences of Willow Creek Ridge, skimming the tops of dry yellow grass, and rattled the edges of the old barn tin with a sound like forgotten voices. Nothing about that land held on to the wind. Not anymore. Calder Henley stood alone by the back pasture fence, one hand resting on a post that had leaned slightly for years. He wore a heavy wool coat that had seen too many winters, its cuffs worn thin, its shape molded to his still straight frame. His silver hair lifted in the breeze, but his face stayed still. Eyes narrowed, not against the cold, but memory. Out beyond the fence, in a separate pen set far from the others, the dog lay in the dirt, a Belgian Malinois named Bran, muscles taut even in rest, one ear half raised, body low and coiled like a spring too long compressed. He didn't bark anymore, not since the war. He didn't growl unless someone came too close. And even then, it sounded more like grief than warning. The pen was built to military spec, reinforced gates, double locks, perimeter bolts in concrete. It wasn't that Bran had escaped. It was that no one wanted to risk what might happen if he did. Calder studied the dog from a distance. Not with fear, not even pity. With something else entirely. The kind of ache that sits just behind the ribs, where old love never fully settles. In Calder's gloved hand was a photograph, soft at the corners from decades of unfolding. A young man in army green knelt on a sunburnt slope, one arm slung around the thick shoulders of the same dog, both of them looking straight into the camera, smiling. Behind the image, written in faded black ink, Elias and Bran, Fallujah, 2011. Elias had been Calder's only son, all sharp wit and stubborn conviction, with a heart too soft for war and a spine too proud to walk away from it. Calder remembered the way he had laughed, how he always fed stray dogs before himself, how he'd signed enlistment papers without asking permission, only leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Dad, I have to try." Elias didn't come back. Bran did. When they brought the dog home, his right leg was splinted, his ribs taped, his eyes glassy and strange. He didn't respond to commands anymore. He flinched at doors, mirrors, raised hands. Twice he lunged at trainers who reached too quickly. No one blamed him, but no one wanted him either, except Calder. Some said he kept Bran out of guilt. Others whispered it was obsession, but truth rarely needs defending. Bran was what was left, and Calder wasn't ready to let go of that last thread. Not when the photograph still sat framed by the old armchair, not when the boy's boots still lined the back hall. Last week, Calder had typed something simple on his old Remington typewriter and pinned it to the entrance gate of Highridge Canine Haven. No media, no press, just a note folded into a plastic sleeve. $1 million for whoever can make Bran trust again. Not obey, not perform. Just sit near a human and not be afraid. Say, the staff said nothing. They'd seen him come out here every afternoon, standing still as the wind passed through. Bran never approached. Calder never asked him to. Inside the house, past a long hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and wool, a leather-bound journal lay open on the coffee table. Elias's handwriting sloped across the page. Bran doesn't fear bombs. He fears silence and empty hands. He only calms when I'm still. Calder had read that line 100 times. He had underlined it twice. That evening, the sun slipped low behind the western ridge. The wind didn't pause. It never did. But Calder remained. hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the dog in the distance. Bran shifted, just barely, a twitch of the tail, the sort of movement a man might miss if he wasn't waiting for it. But Calder noticed, and for a long moment, he didn't breathe, because maybe, just maybe, the dog had noticed him too, and maybe that was a first step, not in healing, but in remembering how. Most people don't notice a child when she learns how to disappear. June Everhart had known how since she was 9. By 12, she becomes so good at it, she could pass through whole neighborhoods without anyone remembering her face. She could move like wind through wire fences, like breath behind window panes. She'd learned where to sleep under bridges that didn't echo with footsteps, how to fold a jacket just right so the cold hit her ribs, not her spine. She knew what time the bakery tossed out the day-olds, what shelters wouldn't ask for a name, and somewhere along the way, she forgot the sound of her own voice. Not from fear, from knowing no one ever really listened. Bozeman, Montana was no city of dreams. The tourists came for the snowcaps and the trout, for the log cabins and craft cider, but June lived in the parts they never photographed. The crumbling edge of the freight yard, the back of a long-closed feed store, where the wind chattered too hard to the tin roof to sleep more than a few hours at a time. She used to remember her mother's laugh, the smell of cinnamon oil in her scarf, the song she hummed, something about a river, a home too far to reach. But time has a way of wearing down the warmest things, and now, when June closed her eyes, all she heard was wind, and all she saw was gray. That afternoon, crouched behind the Shell station where the pavement bled rust from an old vending machine, June overheard 2 men loading crates into a truck. Dog damn near took the guy's arm off. One muttered, "Still can't believe he's offering that kind of money." The other replied, $1 million? For a dog that won't even let you breathe near him? Not just any dog. The first said, "War dog. They say it belonged to his kid." June didn't speak, didn't move, just listened, breath low and still. Then came the sentence that lodged itself in her ribs. Anyone who can make him trust again gets it. That night, June lay curled beneath a sheet of warped plywood propped against a storage shed. Her sweatshirt was damp at the sleeves, and her fingers numb inside her sleeves. But she wasn't thinking about the cold or the hunger clawing at her belly. She was thinking about the dog. She didn't know what $1 million felt like. Couldn't picture it, couldn't want it. But something in the way they spoke about the dog, that no one could reach it, that it belonged to someone gone, set off a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't courage. Not yet. It was recognition. Maybe it needs someone like me. June rose before the frost had finished forming. The sky hadn't decided yet whether to let the sun come through. Streetlights blinked off one by one as she tied the laces of her 2 small sneakers, double knotted to hold the cracked soles in place, and slung her water bottle over her shoulder. She had no address, no name for who she was going to find, just a phrase she'd heard once and held on to like a scrap of warmth. Highridge Canine Haven, and a direction, somewhere out past the silos, past where the town became fields. She walked, past the rail yard and the gas pumps, the thrift store with one good coat in the window. She walked past pickup trucks that never slowed down, past deer fences and cracked sidewalks. She stopped at intersections to ask directions from those who would meet her eye. Most shrugged. A few laughed. One woman, peeling apples on a porch, just pointed with her knife and said, "Keep going west till the noise dies out." June kept going. By midday, the sky had cleared to that pale winter blue that looked painted on. The concrete faded to gravel, then to dirt. Fence posts leaned like old men waiting for someone to remember them. Her feet ached, and twice she thought about sitting down and not standing back up. Once she nearly stepped on a snake coiled in the brush. Still, she walked. Something inside her, something soft but stubborn, kept whispering, "You've already come farther than anyone thought you could." When the sun began to dip, painting the grass in strokes of gold and ash, June saw it. A gate, tall, wooden, bound with thick iron bands. A sign hung from it. No trespassing without permission. Beyond it, rolling hills, fence enclosures, a main house in the distance where the windows caught the last of the light. June stepped forward. Her fingers curled around the cold metal of the gate. She pressed her forehead lightly against it and whispered, not a prayer, not a plea, but quiet truth. I made it. She didn't know who lived inside, didn't know if they'd listen, but she had walked every mile alone, and that counted for something. The first knock didn't make a sound loud enough to carry. June pressed her knuckles to the wood of the gate, tapped once, twice, then waited. Her breath clouded faintly in the cold air, curling like fog over a stream. No one came. She didn't knock again. Just sat down with her back to the post, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the stillness settle around her like an old coat. Evening crept into the hills, long and slow, painting the grass in bruised purples and soft steel. A hawk cut across the sky, silent but sure. Somewhere nearby, a screen door slammed, then nothing. June stayed. She didn't expect kindness. She'd long stopped waiting for it. But the ground beneath her didn't shift, and that alone was a kind of welcome. When the coyotes began their low howls in the distance, June pulled her sweatshirt tighter. She tucked her hands under her arms and leaned her head back against the gate, listening, not for danger, but for something else. Some part of her had always believed that if she sat still long enough, someone, somewhere, might notice she was there. That night, the wind ran cold across the ridge. It hissed through the fence posts, rustled the tall winter grass, but couldn't get under June's skin the way hunger sometimes did. She'd survived colder places with less than a gate to lean on. By morning, frost had formed along the cuffs of her jeans, and her breath came in shallow puffs. Her stomach ached in a way that hunger starts to forget itself. But she was still sitting upright when the first pair of boots appeared. They belonged to a man in uniform. Dark green jacket pressed too neatly for someone who hadn't slept in, and mirrored sunglasses that turned a reflection back at her, smudged and hollow-eyed. "What do you want, kid?" June blinked once. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady. "I heard about the dog." The man tilted his head, amused. "You heard wrong. That dog would tear you apart." "I want to try." He didn't answer, didn't open the gate, just turned and walked back down the gravel path, his shadow stretching long behind him. June didn't call after him. She stayed. By midday, someone inside must have seen her again, this time a kitchen staffer with a box of bread crusts. They didn't speak, just left her by the post and walked away. June ate slowly, tearing each piece in half like it needed to last longer than it would. She stayed. That night, the wind picked up again. Stronger this time. It pushed through her sleeves, lifted her hair, nipped at the backs of her ears. But she didn't lie down. She sat, spine curved, eyes half closed, heart quiet. By the third day, she'd become part of the landscape. Someone patched a tear in the tarp that hung above the gate. Another brought her a dented thermos of lukewarm broth. The staff had begun to whisper. "Still here?" "She hasn't moved." "What's her name?" No one knew, and June didn't offer it. The guards talked, too. Not loud, but loud enough to drift. They called her the stray, the one who doesn't leave. One of them, older, with graying hair and a knee that gave him trouble when the rain came, watched her for a while before speaking into his radio. "Sir, she's back again." A pause. Then a voice, calm, low, unmistakable. "I'll be there in 10. June didn't shift when she heard the boots approaching. The sound was different this time. Not hurried, not cautious, just deliberate. The way someone walks when they don't expect to be challenged. She didn't look up, but she knew. Calder Henley. She'd never seen a photograph, never heard his voice, but she could feel it in the silence that came with him. He stopped a few feet from the gate. She felt his gaze like shade on her shoulders. "You're the one who's been sitting here." June nodded once. "Why?" She didn't take long to answer. "I heard no one could get close to him. Maybe that's why I should try." Henley didn't respond at first. His voice, when it came, was measured like gravel in evening wind. "He's not safe." "I know." "You think you can fix him?" June shook her head slowly. "I don't think he's broken. I think maybe he's just waiting for someone who doesn't leave." The silence between them stretched wide, but not empty. For the first time in years, Calder removed his sunglasses. His eyes, gray, not cold, searched hers, not for defiance, but for truth. And what he found there made something inside his chest stir, like a page turning without his hand. "Be here at sunrise," he said. "You'll have one chance." June didn't smile. She just nodded, because that's all she ever needed. The morning came hushed and pale, with the frost still clinging to the fence posts like silver breath. June stood at the edge of the field just as the first light broke across the hills. She didn't shiver. Not yet. Her body had grown used to the way cold settled deep into the bones and stayed there like memory. Beyond her, past the gravel loop and the sleeping barns, the handlers moved quietly, just silhouettes in heavy coats, leashing dogs who trod beside them with practiced discipline. None of them looked in her direction, not directly, but their awareness was sharp. She could feel it in the air, same as one feels rain before it falls. Calder Henley stood alone by the kennel marked with a single steel plate. Bran. No rank, no code, just a name. He didn't wave her over, didn't nod, just turned and walked toward the field without a word. June followed. The enclosure was already prepared. A large stake tether, military grade, coiled at the center like a waiting serpent. The handlers were tense, shifting weight from one foot to the other, radios clipped to their shoulders, eyes sharp. A medic waited off to the side, just in case. No one expected it to go well. Not really, but no one had stopped it either. Bran emerged like smoke through the gate, his body taut and gleaming, fur brushed but bristled. His stride held the edge of fighter, careful, coiled, instinct on a hair trigger. The moment his paws touched the dirt, the field changed. The air pulled tight, like breath held too long. A handler clipped the tether to Bran's thick collar and stepped back with deliberate caution. The dog didn't bark. Not yet, but his eyes tracked every movement like a rifle scope. June stood just outside the arc of the chain's reach. Not close, not distant. Her hands were empty. No treats, no clickers, no tools. And then she sat down. Not fast, not slow, just a child lowering herself into the winter grass, knees bent, palms flat on her thighs. She didn't speak. She didn't look him in the eye. Bran's snarl was sudden and sharp, a flash of noise that broke the silence like glass shattering in an empty church. He lunged forward, muscle and menace, until the tether pulled tight with a snap that made two handlers flinch. June didn't move. Dust swirled around her boots. Kicked up by the force of his strike, she let it settle, then returned to stillness. Seconds passed, then minutes, 5, 10. The wind shifted once and carried her scent toward him. Bran circled, low and fast, testing the edges of his chain. His breath came hard through his nose. His paws pressed patterns into the dirt, back and forth, doubt and warning. Still, June didn't speak, didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed soft and wide, not on him, but through him, like she was watching something just beyond his shoulder. Her body language was calm in a way only certain animals understand. She didn't want anything from him. That was the difference. She didn't want control. She didn't even want comfort. She just was. From the hill, Calder watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Beside him, a handler leaned close and muttered, "We should pull her out." "No," Calder said. He didn't raise his voice. "Not yet." Then Bran paused. Just for a moment, his ears twitched forward. His growl fell into quiet breath. And then, deliberately, without command, he sat. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't defeat. It was curiosity. June noticed, but didn't change. No smile, no sigh. She only reached into the front pocket of her sweatshirt, slow, like dusk easing across a window, and pulled out a half-wrapped granola bar. The corner was crumbled, the edges soft from warmth. She placed it in front of her and pulled her hand back. Bran's eyes flicked to it, then to her, then back again. He stood, took one step, then another. The tether clinked faintly with each motion, like a bell sounding out in some forgotten chapel. When he reached the edge, he stopped. He was only inches away. His breath reached her knees. His body buzzed with instinct, with memory, with something deep and unfinished. June lowered her eyes, Not submission, but permission. And in the quietest voice she'd used in years, she whispered, "I'm not here to make you do anything. I just want to be here." Something in the dog changed. It wasn't visible, not to anyone standing on the outside of the moment, but Calder saw it. He felt it in his chest, like a thread pulled loose from a knot that had been tightening for too many years. Bran leaned forward, took the granola, and then, without warning, without cause, he lay down beside her, not touching, but close. The entire yard held its breath. Even the birds went silent. From the top of the hill, Calder Henley stepped forward. Slowly, the staff didn't follow. They knew enough not to disturb whatever had just happened. The world didn't need witnesses right now, just reverence. When Calder stopped, the dog looked up, not with fear, but awareness. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't brace. He simply saw him. And for the first time in years, Calder didn't feel like a stranger in his own grief. The sun hadn't risen fully when June returned to the field. The grass was damp with dew, bending gently under her steps like it knew how to yield without breaking. The air smelled of wet pine and soil turned cold overnight. Somewhere nearby, a raven called out once, then flew on, and across the yard, Bran waited. He stood, tethered but still, his breath curling visibly in the crisp light. The wild was still in him, tucked under muscle and memory, but something had shifted. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply watched her, tail low, ears forward, like a question he hadn't dared ask until now. June walked to the same spot as before. No hesitation. No noise. She sat. Same posture. Same calm. The wind lifted her hair slightly, strands catching the light like old silk ribbon. A squirrel darted through the fence line and vanished. June didn't notice. Her attention was on the space between them. Not too close, not too far, just wide enough to be bridged by trust if he chose it. Bran stayed standing, the tether slack between them. He studied her. 10 feet. 7. 5. He took a step forward. Then another. No growl. No twitch. June remained still. There was no command. No reward. No training technique. Just a quiet weight of presence, unthreatening and unafraid. It was the sort of thing you couldn't teach, only carry. Bran lowered his head slightly, sniffed the air. He looked down at her hand resting on her knee. She didn't reach out. She didn't ask for anything. She just breathed, in out, slow, certain, as if her pulse belonged to the ground. Then the dog did something no one had seen him do since the war. He lay down, not wearily, not in defeat, but with a kind of surrender that had nothing to do with giving up and everything to do with being understood. His side touched the grass. His ribs rose and fell. His eyes closed, not fully, but enough to say, "I don't need to watch you right now." June blinked, but didn't move. And Calder, standing farther off near the cedar fence line, let go of a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Bran didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He rested. The field remained still. The wind passed over them, gentle now, brushing through the bare cottonwoods like fingers through a tired man's hair. A few handlers watched from a distance, unsure what they were seeing. No one spoke. No one dared. Bran lifted his head once, eyes on June, then dropped it back down beside her knee. And in that quiet, June finally reached out. Just 2 fingers, slow as sunrise, brushed along the top of his head. He didn't flinch. He leaned into it. And that's when Calder walked toward them. Each step careful, but not uncertain, his boots crunching over dry soil. He didn't speak until he stood only a few feet away. June looked up, not startled, just present. "He's never done that for anyone," Calder said. His voice was soft, low as a creek running under snow. She didn't answer. She just looked down at Bran and said, "He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for no one." Calder tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but recognition. And now, June met his gaze. Now he's not waiting anymore. Bran sighed, a long, deep breath from a chest that had been braced for years, then closed his eyes. They stood like that for some time, June sitting cross-legged in the softening grass. Bran curled beside her, head heavy against her thigh. Calder Henley a few feet away, arms loose at his sides, as if he had just stepped out of a long, difficult story and wasn't sure what came next. The handlers didn't approach. No one said a word. The morning held its silence like something sacred. Eventually, Bran stirred. Not with alarm, just a shift, the way an old dog adjusts into a deeper sleep. His ears flicked. His jaw relaxed. June rose slowly, careful not to disturb him. She brushed the dirt from her knees without urgency, and then looked to Calder. He was watching her, not like a man sizing someone up, but like someone remembering the exact shape of the thing he thought he'd lost. His eyes were steady, but not hard. There was a tiredness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Not weariness, but release. "You did it," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, gravel over oak. "No one else has gotten close. Not even half as close." June didn't smile. She only nodded. She'd known she would. There had never been another option, not in her mind. "The $1 million is yours," Calder continued. "As promised." She looked down at Bran, whose body still pressed lightly against the patch of grass she'd warmed. Then up again. "I don't want the money," she said. Calder's brow rose, but he didn't speak. "I want," she paused, not because she was unsure, but because some words take longer to form when they've been buried for too long. "I want a room." The silence deepened. June went on, voice even, as if reading something she rehearsed only in her bones. "A room where no one tells me to leave. A bed that doesn't belong to someone else. 2 meals a day. Nothing fancy. Just enough." Her throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. "And I want to go to school." Calder blinked, not as a reflex, but like a man brought back into his own body. "That's all?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "That's all." He took a slow step closer, close enough to see the frayed cuffs of her sweatshirt, the dried mud on her sneakers, the streak of windburn along her cheek. And beneath it all, a girl who had not asked for sympathy, nor earned her place with tears, but with stillness, with presence, with staying. "You'll live in the main house," he said. "We have an extra room upstairs. The window faces east." June didn't speak, but the way her shoulders dropped, just slightly, said enough. "You'll eat with me," Calder added, "and we'll get you enrolled first thing Monday. I'll make a few calls." June swallowed, her breath catching just once in her chest. Then she gave a single nod. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. Small ones, but they carried the weight of years. Calder reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. It was not the hand of a benefactor or a guardian. It was a hand of someone who understood what it meant to lose more than he could name, and to be offered a piece of it back, unexpected and undeserved. "You don't know what you've done here," he said. Not just for him. He looked down at Bran, then back at her. "For me, too." That night, June slept in a real bed for the first time in years. The mattress was soft. The pillow held the faint scent of lavender. The window was cracked just enough to let the wind whisper, but not chill. Her backpack rested by the door. A clean pair of socks folded on the dresser. A note, in neat block letters, taped to the wall beside the light switch. "Let me know if the window sticks. Sage." She read it 3 times before turning out the light. Bran lay curled outside her door, nose resting on his paws, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards, as if guarding her from the kind of world he once knew too well. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stayed, in the room across the hall. Calder sat on the edge of his bed with Elias's photograph in hand. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But he whispered something into the dimness, to no one in particular. She didn't fix him. He looked down at Bran's shadow beneath the doorframe. She reminded him he wasn't broken. By the time the first green threads of grass began to stitch themselves into the hills, no one really questioned her presence anymore. June moved through the house like someone born to it. Not loudly, not possessively, but with the quiet comfort of thing that's finally found its place. She walked barefoot on the hardwood floors, braided her hair at the kitchen sink, leaned into the window frames like she'd always known how morning light settled on that side of the house. Bran followed her everywhere. He waited by the door each time she left for school. His ears perked until gravel stopped crunching under the tires. He lay by the mudroom in the afternoons, tail thudding softly at the first sound of her steps. And in the evenings, he curled beside the fireplace with his chin across her boot, his body more relaxed than any of them had seen in years. Calder still rose early. He drank his coffee on the porch facing east, a newspaper folded in half beside him, unread. He watched the trees more than the headlines now, noted how the snow melted first near the elder pines, how the birds returned, 2 or 3 at a time. Some mornings, he packed June's lunch himself, half a peanut butter sandwich, a small apple, a note scribbled in blunt pencil on the napkin. You're braver than most. Geometry is just shapes pretending to matter. Don't forget the sky's still yours. June never said thank you for the notes. She just tucked them into her back pocket and read them later, usually under the big oak at recess, with Bran waiting outside the school gate like a storybook ending someone forgot to write down. People in town started to notice, first with glances, then with small questions. That girl up at the Henley place, who is she? Some said she was his niece. Others said she was the daughter of an old friend. But those who heard the whole story didn't ask again. They only nodded, sometimes with a kind of reverence, and said, "Some things money can't fix." And what they meant was this, that a girl no one looked for had been found, that a dog no one trusted had chosen, and that a man who had spoken mostly to ghosts had begun speaking to the living again. One night, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense. It was marked personal. Calder opened it alone. Inside was a photo, one he hadn't seen before. Elias, sitting with Bran beneath a sun-faded tent, both of them muddy and smiling. On the back, Elias had written, "He calms when I stay still. Just like me." Calder placed it on the mantel, not beside the medals, beside a photo of June, her face turned just slightly to the side, her hand resting lightly on Bran's collar. She wasn't smiling in the picture, but her eyes held something better, a kind of arrival. That spring, the apple trees blossomed early. The ridge that had been dry and wind-burnt for years began to green at the edges, as if unsure it was allowed to bloom again. And in the garden, June knelt one morning with her hands deep in the soil, Bran beside her, half asleep in the sun. Calder watched from the porch, coffee in hand, boots planted like roots in the wood. She didn't look up when she spoke. "You think things know when they're safe?" He took a long sip before answering. "Things like what?" She shrugged. "Dogs. People. Places." Calder set the mug down gently. "I think they do," he said. "I think they always have. They just don't believe it until someone stays." A breeze passed through then, soft, warm, smelling faintly of lilac and earth. Bran lifted his head briefly, nose twitching, then settled again, and the ridge, which had known years of silence and waiting, held still in the light, not because it was trying to remember, but because it no longer had to. He didn't need training. He didn't need fixing. What Bran needed, what all of us need, was someone who stayed. At Hero Paws 77, we believe that stories like this carry more than warmth. They carry truth. A forgotten girl, a broken veteran, a dog who had given up on the world. And yet, through stillness, through quiet, through the slow bloom of trust, something deeply human returned to the ridge that had once gone silent. As author Brené Brown once said, maybe stories are just data with a soul. And if you felt something while watching this, you're part of that soul. So please, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Maybe tell us about the Bran in your life, or the June, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to Hero Paws 77. Every new subscriber brings us closer to 10,000 voices strong, helping us create deeper, more meaningful videos that honor both people and the dogs who walk quietly beside them. Because sometimes, the best stories aren't about heroes who shout. They're about the ones who wait, and the ones who choose to stay. Thank you for being here. Let's keep walking. Together,